My name doesn't matter for this. What matters is I used to whistle to my little brother in the woods so we'd never lose each other. A stupid four-note tune our dad taught us when we were kids. So if either of us wandered off the trail, we'd whistle it and the other would whistle back. I hadn't used it in 15 years until 3 weeks ago, and I will never use it again for as long as I live. I was camping alone. That was the whole point of the trip. My divorce had just finalized, and I wanted 3 days where nobody could reach me. I drove 2 hours into the Ashcombe backcountry, hiked another 4 miles past the last marked trailhead, and set up camp next to a creek where I hadn't seen another human being since noon. The first night was quiet. Good quiet. I fell asleep around 10 with the fire still going. I want to describe that fire a little because it matters later. I remember watching it before I dozed off, thinking how strange it was that after everything, the divorce, the empty apartment, 6 months of silence I hadn't chosen, this was the first night in almost a year my chest didn't feel tight. I remember thinking I should do this more often. I think about that thought constantly now, how close I came to feeling something like peace right before all of it started. I woke up at 1 a.m. to whistling. Our whistle. The 4-note 1. Coming from somewhere across the creek. I lay there for a full minute convincing myself I'd dreamed it, that grief plays tricks, that my brother, who died 4 years ago, car accident, I haven't said those words out loud to anyone in a long time, was not standing in the woods at 1 a.m. whistling a song only the two of us ever knew. Then it came again. Closer. I didn't answer it. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and swept it across the creek. Nothing but water and rock. But the whistle came a third time, and this time it came from behind me, from the direction of my own tent, like whatever was making it had crossed the creek in the 11 seconds my back was turned. I want to be clear about something. I am not a superstitious person. I do not believe in ghosts. What I believe in is that at 1:47 a.m., standing in the dark 4 miles from the nearest trail, I heard something whistle, a private song that existed in exactly 2 human minds, one of them buried, and I have no explanation for it that lets me sleep at night. I didn't sleep. I sat by the dead fire with my knife out until sunrise, and in the daylight, I told myself it had to be a bird. Some birds mimic sound. I'd read that somewhere. I almost believed it enough to stay a second night. Around 7 a.m., still trying to talk myself back into a normal morning, I walked down to the creek to splash water on my face, and that's when I noticed my fire pit from the night before wasn't the only one. About 30 feet upstream, tucked behind a boulder I hadn't even noticed in the dark, there was a second ring of stones with old ash inside it. Not fresh, not from anyone recent, but arranged with the same care mine had been, like whoever built it had done it 100 times before. Sitting in the center of the cold ash, placed deliberately on top rather than buried in it, was a child's plastic whistle. The cheap kind you'd find at a dollar store, faded almost white from years of weather. I didn't touch it. I've never regretted not touching something more than that whistle, because some part of me, even then, understood that picking it up would have been the same as answering. Almost, until I went to refill my water bottle at the creek around 9 a.m. and found the sand on the bank covered in bare footprints, not boot prints. Bare human feet, small, a child's size, walking in a slow circle around my campsite and stopping every single time at the exact spot outside my tent flap where I sleep with my head. My brother was 34 when he died. Those weren't his footprints. Those were a child's. For a moment, standing there at the creek with the sun already up and warm on my back, I let myself think through it logically, the way you do when you desperately want a boring explanation. A child couldn't be 4 miles past the last trailhead alone. There had been no other cars at the lot, no family camp nearby that I'd passed. I walked the full circle of footprints twice, counting them, and both times I counted the same number, 19. Not a round number. Not a number that meant anything to me, until I got home 3 days later and looked back at old photos from childhood and realized, with my stomach dropping through the floor, that our whistle, the 4-note 1, took exactly 19 steps to walk while whistling it slowly, the way my brother used to when he was stalling, dragging his feet through the yard, not wanting to come inside for dinner. I packed up right there, hands too unsteady to properly tie my bag shut, and started the 4-mile hike back to my car faster than I've ever moved with a full pack on. About halfway back, my phone buzzed with 1 bar of signal, a voicemail notification, Timestamped 1:41 a.m. the night before from a number I didn't recognize, area code local to nowhere near where I was. I played it standing on the trail. 11 seconds of silence. Then, faint, underneath the static, 4 notes. Our whistle, followed by a small voice, young, maybe 6 or 7 years old, saying one sentence before the message cut off. You're supposed to whistle back. I have never once in my entire life given that number to anyone. I checked the call log for the entire trip afterward. There is no incoming call listed. Only the voicemail. Like it had been left directly into the file with no call ever placed. I made it back to my car by 1 p.m. and drove straight to the ranger station instead of home, because I needed to say the words out loud to a person with a badge, or I was going to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. The ranger on duty, a woman in her 50s who did not look like someone easily rattled, asked exactly one question before I'd even finished describing the footprints. Did it whistle first, or did you? When I told her it whistled first, she nodded slowly and said something I've replayed 100 times since. She said the backcountry past that trailhead has a nickname among the older rangers. They call it the Answering Woods, because every few years someone comes in reporting the exact same thing, a sound only they should know. A voice asking to be answered. And every single time, without exception, the ones who whistle back don't come out again. She didn't elaborate. She just filed a report, told me not to camp past that trailhead again, and wished me a safe drive home like she was closing out a routine complaint about noise. I looked into it anyway, because I couldn't leave it alone. There's a thin paper trail. 3 disappearances in that stretch of backcountry over the last 22 years, all solo campers, all last seen within a mile of that creek, all cases quietly closed as presumed lost, terrain hazard, despite search teams never finding a single trace of any of them. Not a boot, not a pack, not a bone. I think about that voicemail more than I'd like to admit. 11 seconds of silence, 4 notes, 1 sentence. I never called that number back. I never will. I did, out of some morbid need to be sure, drive past a public library 2 towns over and look up the 3 names from those closed cases. All men, all in their 30s or 40s. All camping alone in the months after losing someone. A spouse, a parent, in one case, a twin brother, according to the local obituary I found sitting right beside his missing person notice, printed the same week. I don't think the woods are choosing people at random. I think grief leaves a door open somewhere it shouldn't, and something out past that trailhead has learned exactly what sound to knock with. If you're ever alone in the woods and you hear something that knows a sound only you and someone you lost would know, do not whistle back. It already knows the tune. It's only ever missing one thing, and that's you answering it. I want to start with the part that still doesn't make sense to me, because if I start anywhere else, you won't believe the rest. On the second night of our trip, a park ranger walked into our campsite, checked our permit, and left. 20 minutes later, a second park ranger did the exact same thing. Same questions. Same flashlight. Same badge number. There is only one ranger assigned to that section of forest. I know because I called the district office myself 3 days later, hands shaking so hard I had to redial twice. It was me, my fiancé Mateo, and our friend Deja, 3 days into a 5-day trip through Hollow Pines, a stretch of state forest with almost no cell signal and one ranger who does the rounds by truck twice a day. We planned this trip as a kind of pre-wedding trio trip, the 3 of us having grown up together, and Deja had joked more than once that this would be our last real adventure before Mateo and I settled into being boring married people. We'd met him the first afternoon. Friendly guy, mid-30s, badge number 11-4, checked our permit, told us where the good swimming holes were, drove off. Totally normal. Second night, around 9:15 p.m., headlights came down the fire road, and the same ranger walked up to our site. Same uniform, same friendly tone, same opening line. Evening, folks, just doing a permit check. Like he'd never met us that afternoon at all. Mateo pointed out, half joking, that he'd already checked us earlier that day. The ranger's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did, just for a second, like a system rebooting. He said, "Just following procedure, sir," checked our permit again, and left. We laughed about it after he drove off, Overworked guy, forgetful, whatever. We went back to the fire. At 9:40, headlights came down the fire road again. Same truck, same ranger. Same walk up to the site, same evening folks, just doing a permit check, delivered in the exact same cadence, word for word, like a recording. This time, Deja didn't say anything. None of us did. We just handed him the permit again, and he looked at it for exactly as long as he had both previous times, nodded, and walked back to his truck. He didn't drive away this time. He sat in the cab, engine off, headlights on, facing our site for 11 minutes. I counted. Then the headlights went dark, and we heard the truck door open and shut, but nobody got out that we could see. Just the sound of the door. At some point during those 11 minutes, Deja whispered that she wanted to check something on her phone, one bar of signal flickering at the top corner, and pulled up the photo Mateo had taken of the Ranger's badge that afternoon. Just a casual snapshot for our own records, the kind you take without really thinking about why. She zoomed in on it in the dark, the three of us huddled around the screen, and none of us said anything for a long moment because the badge number in the photo from that afternoon read 11-4, clean and legible. But the badge on the man sitting silently in that truck, when Mateo dared to sweep the headlamp across it just once before we thought better of it, had 2 extra digits scratched crudely into the metal beneath the number, like something carved in with a fingernail rather than stamped by a machine. We didn't sleep. We sat by the fire with a hatchet between us until first light, and when the sun came up, the truck was gone. No tire tracks leading out on the fire road, only tracks leading in. We packed up at dawn and drove straight to the ranger station to report what felt, by that point, less like a weird coincidence and more like something we needed on record. The woman at the front desk pulled up the schedule and told us badge 114 wasn't even working that district that week. He'd been out on medical leave for 11 days. I asked her, straight out, who had been patrolling Hollow Pines instead. She checked, went quiet for a second too long, and said there'd been no coverage assigned to that section at all this week. Nobody had been sent out. No truck should have been anywhere near our site. She asked us for a badge number anyway, procedure, and when Mateo said 114, her expression changed in a way I still think about. She asked us to wait, stepped into a back office, and came back with an older man, a supervisor, who asked us to describe the ranger in detail. His exact tone when he said, just doing a permit check, how he held the flashlight, whether he ever blinked. The supervisor told us, carefully, like he'd delivered this kind of news before, that badge 114 belonged to a ranger who died on duty in that section of forest 6 years ago, a single vehicle accident on the fire road at night, driving his own patrol truck, same route we described. His body was found the next morning still belted into the driver's seat, headlights on, facing into the trees, engine off. He said the department kept the badge number retired out of respect. Nobody had been assigned 1114 since. He asked, almost reluctantly, whether we still had that photo Mateo had taken of the badge our first afternoon. Mateo pulled it up and handed the supervisor his phone. The man looked at it for a long time, then asked us to wait again, and came back a second time with a folder, old, the edges soft from handling. Inside was a scanned photograph from the original accident report 6 years earlier, a close-up of the badge recovered from the wreck, the number L14 stamped clean into the metal, and beneath it, scratched crudely by hand, 2 extra digits that hadn't been there when the badge was issued. The same 2 digits Mateo swore he'd seen carved into the badge on the man sitting in that truck the night before. The supervisor closed the folder without explaining what the extra numbers meant, or who could have scratched them into evidence sitting in a locked file cabinet for 6 years. He just told us, quietly, that we weren't the first group to come in describing this. He said there'd been 4 other reports over 6 years, always the same pattern. A double check 20 to 30 minutes apart, always at night, always ending with the truck sitting motionless afterward for somewhere between 8 and 15 minutes before disappearing without tire tracks leading out. He said in 2 of those cases, the campers hadn't left in time. He didn't say what happened to them. He didn't need to. The look on his face when Deja asked directly was answer enough, and none of us pushed him further. We didn't ask any more questions after that. We got back in our car and drove 4 hours home without stopping, and none of us have talked about going back to Hollow Pines, not once, not even as a joke. What still keeps me up isn't the first visit, or even the second. It's the 11 minutes he sat in that truck with the engine off, headlights aimed straight at our tent, not moving, not speaking, like he was deciding something. I don't know what would have happened in Minute 12 if the sun hadn't started coming up when it did. I don't want to know. Mateo and I got married 4 months later, smaller than we'd planned, closer friends and family only. Deja gave a toast that night, and near the end of it, half joking the way you do at weddings, she raised her glass and said she was just glad all three of us made it out of those woods to see this day. Nobody at the reception understood why the three of us went completely silent for a second before we laughed it off and moved on. Some jokes only work if you weren't actually there counting the minutes. If a park ranger ever checks your permit twice in one night, and the second time feels like the first one played back instead of a new visit, don't wait for the third check to see what happens. Get in your car. You are not being asked for paperwork. You're being counted. Four of us went out to Miller's Bend for what was supposed to be a normal end-of-summer trip. Me, my husband Josh, and our friends Ray and Tanya, who'd been together long enough that we'd started planning our vacations around each other's schedules without even discussing it anymore. We'd camped that same spot for 3 years running. Nothing had ever gone wrong there. That's exactly why none of us thought twice when we saw the second fire. Miller's Bend had always been our safe trip, if that makes sense. The one we picked when work had been brutal and nobody wanted surprises. Same drive, same gas station stop, same joke. Ray made every year about Tanya forgetting the bug spray. Familiarity was the whole point. I think that's part of why what happened cut so deep. It didn't happen somewhere unfamiliar and dangerous feeling. It happened in the one place all four of us had stopped being on guard. We set up around 5 p.m. on a Friday, right at the tree line above the river, same spot as always. By dark, we had our fire going, dinner cooking, and Ray pointed across the water and said, "Huh. Didn't think anyone else was out here this weekend." There was a second campfire, small, flickering on the opposite bank, maybe 200 yards downriver. We hadn't passed anyone on the trail end. No other cars in the lot when we parked. But there it was, a fire burning steady on the far bank, and none of us thought much of it beyond mild annoyance that we might have neighbors. Around 9 p.m., Tanya said something that made the table go quiet. She'd been watching the second fire on and off, and she said, "It's the same size as ours." Like, exactly the same size. And it moves when ours moves. We all looked. She was right. Every time our fire popped and the flames jumped, a half second later, the fire across the river did the same thing. Same rhythm. Same height. Like a delayed reflection with no water flat enough to reflect anything. Josh laughed it off, said it was probably a coincidence in wind patterns. Nobody really believed that, but nobody wanted to be the one to say what we were all thinking, which was that fires don't mirror other fires. Fires don't take turns. At 10:30, Ray took a headlamp down to the river's edge to get a better look, and when he came back, his face had changed completely. He said the second fire wasn't on the far bank at all. It was floating a few feet above the water, no wood, no visible fuel, just flames sitting in open air. And beneath it, in the reflection on the water, he said he could see the shape of people sitting around it. 4 shapes, seated in the exact same positions we were seated in around our own fire, none of them moving, none of them with visible faces. Before we left, Josh insisted on getting a photo, some instinct telling him we'd need proof, or none of us would believe our own memory of it later. He took 3 shots on his phone in a row. The first 2 showed nothing but darkness and a smear of orange across the water, exactly what you'd expect from a long exposure at night. The third one, taken less than a second after the second, showed the fire much closer than it had any right to be, as if the camera had captured it mid-crossing, halfway between the far bank and our own, with no visible source of movement in between the 2 frames. Josh deleted the photo almost immediately, out of pure reflex, and none of us have ever been able to talk him into explaining exactly why. We packed up immediately. No debate this time. As we broke down the tents, the second fire across the river went out at the exact same second ours did when Josh kicked dirt over the coals. Not before, not after, the same instant, like they were tied to the same switch. We hiked back to the car in full dark, all 4 headlamps on, nobody speaking above a whisper. About a quarter mile from the lot, Tanya grabbed my arm and pointed back through the trees. Both fires were burning again, ours and theirs. Except we hadn't relit ours. We doused it completely, stomped the coals, packed the extinguished ash into a bag like we always do. We didn't stop walking. We didn't look again. We got in the car, and Josh drove us straight to the 24-hour diner on the highway, and we sat there until sunrise because none of us wanted to be alone in a dark house that night either. Somewhere around 3 a.m., sitting in that booth with cold coffee none of us were drinking, Tanya pulled out her phone to check the time and froze. She turned the screen toward the rest of us without a word. Her lock screen photo, one she'd set months earlier of the four of us at Miller's Bend from a previous trip, all smiling around our fire, now had something different in the background that none of us remembered being there when she'd chosen the photo. Faint, almost lost in the tree line behind us in the old picture, was the outline of a second fire, small and orange, exactly where we'd seen it that night. She said she'd looked at that photo probably 1,000 times over the past year. She said she would have noticed. 2 days later, sitting in that same diner booth out of some need to make sense of it, Ray pulled up an old regional newspaper archive on his phone and found a short article from 11 years earlier about a family of 4 who'd camped at Miller's Bend and never made it back to their car. Before he found it, we spent almost an hour searching for anything at all connected to that stretch of river, mostly turning up nothing. Old fishing reports, a bridge dedication from the 1970s, nothing useful. Ray almost gave up. It was Josh who suggested searching for missing persons cases instead of anything about the river by name, and that single change in the search terms is the only reason we ever found it at all. Search teams found their site untouched, tent standing, food still on the stove, but no bodies, no trail, no sign of struggle. The article mentioned one detail that made all 4 of us set our coffee down at the same time. A park ranger interviewed for the piece said the family's campsite had been found with 2 separate fire pits built almost exactly 200 yards apart on opposite riverbanks, though the family had only ever reported building one. The article included a grainy black and white photo from the original search, taken from a helicopter, showing both fire rings from above. And if you looked closely enough, zooming in on Ray's phone until the pixels blurred, the second ring on the far bank wasn't stacked with river stones like a normal fire pit at all. It was built in a near-perfect circle of something the caption never identified, described only, in a single dry sentence near the bottom of the article, as unidentified debris consistent with prior campsite use. Nobody could explain who built the second pit, or why, or what it had been for. The case was never solved. The family was never found. The article did include one line from a search volunteer, almost buried near the bottom, that none of us could stop reading over and over, he said, when they arrived at the abandoned site. Both fire pits still had warm coals in them, hours after the family was reported missing, as if whoever, or whatever, had been tending 2 fires that whole time had only just stepped away. We haven't been back to Miller's Bend since, and none of us ever will. But Tanya told me something a few weeks after, quietly, like she'd been sitting on it and needed to finally say it to someone. She said that in the last few seconds before we started hiking out, right as Ray was describing the 4 still shapes around that floating fire, she counted them again without meaning to. She said there were 5. If you're ever camping somewhere you've been 100 times before, somewhere that's always felt completely safe, and you see a second fire burning across the water that shouldn't be there, don't watch it long enough to count who's sitting around it. By the time you notice it's mirroring you, it's already decided it wants your seat. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-feeling horror like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. If this story gave you chills, let me know in the comments what you think really happened. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.